Right to it. Arthur, I'm going to start with you. Details of the government's plan still yet to be worked out, but is this a good move by the government, and does it mean an end is in sight?
I think it's a stopgap move. I think it's a bold move. I think it makes sense to quell what appears to be panic all over the world. I think at this point in time, it's essential that we have government action, the backup that's necessary. If these were long-term steps, I'd be very concerned about them. The short selling clearly is an open question. Nobody knows how that will play out. But the risk of allowing unfettered short selling at this point of instability in the markets is outweighed by the government taking the action they did in a temporary stop on short selling in financial markets. Mm-hmm. I think the RTC notion, the version of that to put an end to the free fall in the real estate market, is clearly the strongest and most appropriate step that government is taking at this point in time. And finally, what we've just heard is a backstop for money market funds, which have never truly broken the buck, fallen below $1, mm-hmm. is a key to public confidence. That, of all the things that they've done, that was probably the most essential step, and that was just announced.
Bill, I want to bring you into this about a minute before we have to take a break. You've been we've talked to you a lot. You've been emotional about some of the news that happened this week. What about the government's plan or expectations of a plan here?
Well, I must say I'm skeptical on all counts, and I have great respect for Arthur Levitt, but I think I disagree with him. As for short selling, I think it is unwise to muck about in market mechanisms, and that's about all I want to say there. As for the plan to insure money market funds, after all, we have long had deposit insurance, insuring up to 100,000 deposits. Is this going to insure up to $1 million for an account there? Until we see the details, I'd be very skeptical that this is a good move. It interacts with the deposit insurance mm-hmm. for commercial banks. As for this grand plan, until we see some details, I'm going to be very skeptical. For example, are we going to buy up mortgages from European banks?
Right.
As one issue.
Professor Siegel, I want to start with you. We're seeing quite a rally around the globe this morning. You've studied the financial markets for a long time. Should we not read too much into this rally, or does that rally say we're at the bottom?
Well, one thing we know is that when there's an extreme movement in markets, they move together around the world. The correlations are very, very high. And what we're seeing around the world is a catch-up to the late rally that we had the day before yesterday that didn't get factored in the market, and then the rally that we anticipate this morning. So I'm not surprised that we're seeing Europe and Asia up 5% or more, given this news.
But it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to last. Is that true, Professor Siegel?
Well, the question is this a good fix? And I was going to comment on the fact, agreeing with Arthur, that the backup of the money market funds, I think, is essential, because one thing we haven't talked about is that people lose confidence of what their safe money is. Their deposits and their money market funds. We're going to have a run on those financial institutions. We're back in the 1930s, and with the massive failures. This helps address that, and I think the Fed, the Treasury, have to say your deposits are safe, and the money market funds. We have to make sure that we don't get a run on those institutions. So I consider that really the most important piece. We don't have the details on the buyout of the bad assets, and I consider the short selling not really essential over here. It really wasn't the cause of the failure of Lehman and these other financial institutions.
Bill, it's Ellen Braitman. I have a question here, which is, where's the moral hazard component? They come out with this plan. Where's the slap on the wrist to at least say to the institutions themselves, hey, you can't do X, Y, and Z while we're in the process of bailing you out?
Well, let's talk about the money market funds. Presumably, what we're going to end up with is a regulatory regime applied to the money market funds. So where's that going to take us? I don't get it. There was only one fund that got into trouble. It did not produce spreading chaos across the market. And if we start to underwrite the entire financial system, we're piece by piece by piece, we're going to take our market in an entirely different direction from where it ought to go.
Yeah, Arthur, Bill, Jeremy, this is Eric Schatzker. I have a similar question for you. What price is to be paid by the companies, let's say the managements, if you accept government assistance, whether it be in the form of a loan or whether you give up some of your damaged assets? How can you really profit here? Are they going to limit compensation?
I don't understand how any of this is going to work. There's some grand ideas that simply can't be administered or executed. And I'm afraid that we've got a grand idea that when we start to actually write it down on paper how it's going to work, we're going to find one stumbling block after another.
I mean, how do you value these assets? I mean, Wall Street's had a hard time doing it. I mean, Arthur, how are we going to get to the bottom of this?
I don't think you can precisely value the assets. I think all of these steps, if carried to their extreme, could have severe unintended consequences. This is a stopgap. This is a fire that's burning, and I think Paulson is acting decisively and, in my judgment, heroically. Is he taking a risk? You bet he's taking a risk. These are not necessarily steps that will be with us weeks or months from now. They're immediate steps to put public confidence back into play. And I think it's an appropriate risk to be taken. Do I think that short selling should be eliminated? No, not in terms of the overall market. I think short selling is a terribly valuable tool. But I think right now the possibility of abuse by hedge funds, which are totally unregulated and totally opaque, I think that's something that has to be done. We have to get to the core of the problem in terms of what's going on at these hedge funds. What's going on with the derivatives. There's too much we don't know about these markets. What Paulson is doing is, let's take a time out now, let's put a hold on some things, and then we'll get to the fix. And I don't take fault with that at all.
Professor Siegel, I think you wanted to jump in on the conversation.
Yeah. Well, I want to respectfully disagree with my good friend Bill Poole. I really think there was a panic that was spreading. Bill, we saw 90-day T-bill rates as 4 basis points. That's like a half a century. There was a terrible run for cash. And there was a Bank of New York, a second money market fund, was reporting trouble. This could have spread very, very quickly. I think this is an essential part of the program for stabilization.
Bill, you want to jump in?
I think we need to put in place reforms perhaps for the long run, but nothing we do ought to cause us problems tomorrow and the next day. And I am very leery about jumping in with emergency measures like this.
Arthur, you and I have talked many times over the past few months, and you said we do have to be careful about the regulations we set in place. Give ourselves some time to really carefully assess the situation. You still hold to that?
I do. There are 2 messages that I think come out of this week. Number one, we've had a massive failure by Congress in overseeing regulatory agencies responsible for protecting our investors. And the second message, I think, is that the Secretary of the Treasury has gone against his own political orthodoxy in coming up with a bold program with risks to energetically protect the public interest. I think that's been terribly important and very constructive.
All right, just got a minute left here. Professor Siegel, any final thoughts on what a week this has been? Any final thoughts, certainly for investors and so on?
Well, I think what we could have seen, on Wednesday is the bottom. I think that falling knife that everyone talked about has finally hit the ground with financials. So I'm very, very optimistic from this point onward.
Bill, any optimism here on your part?
Oh, yeah, I have. I'm always optimistic because I think we have a very fundamentally sound economy. The biggest issue we face is too much leverage. There's too much debt in the economy, and we've got to reduce the incentive for debt.
And Arthur, I'll give you 20 seconds here.
I think the message here is a broad overview of what we can do to better protect investors. The system has been distorted by political considerations, and the Congress simply has to get its act together and act for the people.
Gentlemen, thank you.